So we're going to start. The general run of show is I'm going to ask them a few questions. They will hopefully give me a few answers, or else it'll make it really awkward for me. Then all four of us are going to read from our most recent novels. And then we are going to open it up to questions, and hopefully that won't be awkward, insofar as hopefully you will have lots of questions. If you don't, I will just start asking them more questions. But you don't. You have questions. Why else would you be here? And then we are going to sign, and then we will all sing the farewell campfire song and be out of here by 5. So, not to get you now. You're already nostalgic for something that hasn't even happened yet. I don't mean to jump to the end. We will start at the beginning with the very, very hard probing questions that I have for you. We're going to start, because this is the start of the YA season at the 92nd Street Y, and we are very excited that they are bringing YA into the fold. I want to go back to when you were YAs, or at least when you were teenagers, and if you could talk a little bit about what you read, favorite books, or what genres you read. Who were you as a reader when you were a teenager? Eliot?
I started out by reading a lot of sword and sorcery. So anything with like glowy blue magic on the cover and dragons with really long names that no one could pronounce. That was my specialty as a reader. And I probably went through like 1 or 2 of those a month, I guess, whenever I wasn't in school. So I think that's how I began. It took me a while. Like I don't write fantasy now, but I was always thinking in fantasy modes when I first started writing. And my first novel that was never published was a fantasy.
Wait, what was the name of the protagonist?
The name of the protagonist?
Did it have a hyphen in it?
It was Endangered.
Or like a...
Yeah, Ingailor. So
what was their hometown?
I forget. Oh, Shayel. Because there was a which was like an acronym. It was sort of like scuba, because it was this human-made underwater laboratory where there was an apocalypse on the surface, so humans had to repopulate from this place underwater, and slowly like they built tribes. Except the world was magic now, because that's what. I don't know what nuclear war causes. This book was never published. I think I mentioned that, right?
Were there dolphins?
I'm getting all misty.
There were people that rode sea animals.
I knew it.
So
I'll totally be your beta reader for that.
And then I would sneak any novels that had sort of sexy-looking covers out of the adult section and keep them under my bed and read those on the weekends as well. So that's a snapshot of me.
All right, Maggie.
And it's a probing snapshot. Well, I was going to give the easy answer, which was that I read a lot of British fantasy growing up, like Louis Alexander and Susan Cooper and all of that. But instead, I think I'm going to tell you what my favorite novel was when I was a child. It was Dog's Body by Diana Wynne Jones. Has anybody actually read this novel other than me? So this novel is impossible to describe to people because they ask you what it's about. And Diana Wynne Jones writes some other extremely succinct novels, but this one apparently is about the dog star being being accused of a crime, and he must serve his sentence on Earth in the form of an actual dog while he is looking for a magical artifact which is not truly explained during it, and then return it back to space. There's also some Welsh mythology in there. And I thought, this novel is interesting. I will never write a novel that's that convoluted to describe, and then I wrote The Scorpio Races.
All comes back to you. Paul?
Well, when I was sort of 12, 13, my parents, who very much wanted me to learn the value of $1, forced me to get a job. And I worked at a library, which I actually loved, but I was a terrible employee. And because they would send me with a little cart, this is back when there were libraries and books, and I would have a cart with all the books that I was supposed to shelve, and I would push it into the farthest corner of the library where I would just sit there and read all day. And because I thought, wait, the best books must be in the adult section because they were forbidden. So I would read, I read some stuff like To Kill a Mockingbird and the classics and John Steinbeck and things that I could understand, but I'd also read like John Updike and Philip Roth, and none of it would make any sense to me. But I do remember I was like the only child who was very concerned with like divorce and bad sex, because I got enough of that. But yeah, so it was a very strange, outlook. But I did love just having access to that many books.
So what is the value of $1?
God only knows. No, the thing that they taught me was that I did not want to have a job. So that's why you become a writer, basically. So it backfired on them horribly.
Awesome. In trying to think of common themes for your 3 books that we are hearing from and discussing, that was not a very easy thing to try to think of. But I do think that all 3 of you are interesting in so far as you don't adhere solely to the adage of write what you know. That none of the novels that we're here for really could ever be misconstrued as being autobiographical, whether you're writing from the point of view of different genders, whether you're writing from a different world. And yet I do think that part of you ends up in the book anyway. And so I'd love for you to just obviously introduce the book, but also talk about sort of what elements do you feel are most autobiographical about them, but also for the things that were farther afield, sort of how you got into that mindset.
Should we stall by giving David like 40 points for that question? Because I think, well done.
Well, thank you. I tried.
You started at 40.
It was either that or you all write in English. But
Books.
yes.
So after that failure of a fantasy novel, I started to write very, very realistically. My first novel was pretty much an autobiographical book. I was living in Harlem and then commuting to the Upper East Side where I work as a tutor, and the book was about the very same thing. And so, because I'd figured the fantasy novel was such a disaster, I should do the write what you know aspect. So I was like, what stories do I tell friends or like at dinner parties that get a reaction? And it was always my tutoring stories, so I figured I would just go there.
Tutor with 2 T's.
Tutor, yes, T-U-T. Yep. I wasn't Henry VIII or anything.
I just spent some time with a reenactor, so I just went 3.
And then I gradually got over that. And actually, I think the big problem for me was my main characters. If they were too much like me, I wouldn't know what made them unique. Like I couldn't tell, I have a million different sensations, and I don't know what's detail and what's important for other people to know about me. So when I wrote as myself, I had these kind of diffuse, unknowable main characters. And then Endangered is about a 14-year-old girl who's half Congolese, and she's living in Congo during a time of war and trying to stay alive, crossing the country with an orphan ape by her side. So obviously I've moved on from the write what you know part of things. But at the same time, Sophie is, she's working through what it means to be a child by adopting this ape. And so it's like figuring out sort of that kind of bond and like what it means to be to care for something and be cared for, which I think is something that really interested me as a person in the last decade. Just sort of like as a self-exploration of going from I moved a lot when I was a child, so it was sort of like it felt like I was an island going from place to place, and like now I've been in New York for 12 years and I feel like I have roots and a place to be, and so I think it's a way to explore that sense of permanent connection that you can have.
That's lies.
It's all lies.
No, because you said that you moved away from write what you know, but I know for a fact that you actually went and did research for this book, so you do actually know firsthand.
That was write what you learned, not, yeah.
Oh, well you know what you learned. What did they teach you in school?
But that's research. I mean, but Eliot, he didn't, we're going to defend, I think he's telling the truth because he knew he was writing the book before he went to the Congo to do that experiment. So I think when you go to research something,
I think it's a
that
very
doesn't
fine
count
line.
as what you...
We're talking old knowledge here versus new knowledge. Is that what
No,
we're
we're talking about yourself.
Short-term memory.
Self-knowledge. We're talking about self-knowledge.
Self-knowledge.
I know you try to avoid that whenever possible.
That's
That's
true.
the worst kind.
Yeah.
I know, self-awareness. What a curse of humanity.
It's deadly.
So let's hear your answer.
All right, so The Dream Thieves is the second book in the Raven Boys, the Raven Cycle. How many of you have read the Raven Cycle? Actually, how many of you have read any of our books? How many of you have at least heard of any of our books? How many of you just wandered in here off the street and have no idea why we're here? Just checking. Okay, so it's the second book in the Raven Cycle series, and it follows a character from the first book, Ronan Lynch. And Ronan Lynch is kind of a secondary character in the first book. He's the resident bad boy. He has a very short list of positive attributes, namely, he's brave and loyal and has a strong right hook. So we'll just say he's hot. And he's hot. Yeah, that's about it for Ronan Lynch. And from the outside, he looks very unpalatable, very pugilistic all the time. And I was also an extremely terrible person when I was in college. Mostly I was brave and loyal and had a strong right hook, although I only broke one other person's nose when I was in college. Oh, and Ronan Lynch is also a terrible street racer, and I was a terrible street racer when I was in college. And so I was very interested when I shifted the view to him in the second book to see what made him tick on the inside. And so he has his reasons for being that way, as I did, although my father was not beaten to death with a tire iron, and nor can I literally pull objects out of my dreams. But I like to look inside and see why you would protect yourself by having that kind of crusty exterior. Although there's found knowledge as well. David.
I mean, do you, because within the Raven cycle you are seeing the various characters, do you feel that you identify more with Ronan than the others?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely have moved away from a place where, like, the exact same reasons that Eliot said, where I wouldn't put myself so wholeheartedly into a character unless I was darn sure what it was that made me tick in a certain way. So with Ronan, I can do it because he's not me, nor was he me as a college student, but we share a lot of the same DNA. Like, we have the same right arm, that's the shifting arm.
Well, Gorgeous is about Becky Randall, who's an 18-year-old girl from a trailer park in Missouri, so it is entirely autobiographical. Which actually...
There goes my thesis.
I know. On some shameful and yet wondrous level, it really is. But people would ask me, gee, how hard was it for you to write in the voice of this 18-year-old girl? And I would think, way too easy. Because it was, although it's funny, I was just thinking about this because I have friends who were actors and friends who also were drag performers, and I've written other things in women's voices, and this is a terrible generalization, but it's sometimes true that when you write women characters, they have a far greater emotional range.
Tread
sometimes.
carefully, Paul.
Exactly. But I think, well, they don't necessarily, but for a guy they can. You know that you have access to worlds and language and also and clothes. God
That's
knows.
fine. Just be aware that my eyebrow over on this side is getting very pointy.
Yes, no. That's why I said it was a terrible generalization, but it's why it's fun, and it's. So when I was writing this, it's about a girl who, and this all happens in the first chapter, so I'm not spoiling anything, who, when her mother dies, she's got this very sort of dead-end life. She gets this sort of magical offer, and she gets flown to New York, and there's this sort of world-famous reclusive designer named Tom Kelly, who says to her, I'll make you 3 dresses, one red, one white, and one black. And if you wear them, and if you do everything I say, you will become the most beautiful woman who has ever lived. And she says yes, and it goes on from there. So it's this sort of ride, but came out of my personal childhood adult obsessions with all kinds of fashion and pop culture and clothing and what it says about us and beauty and all of that stuff that is either deeply superficial or profoundly superficial. Because I think no matter what anyone says about not caring about what they look like or what they're wearing, everybody gets dressed pretty much every day, and everybody looks in the mirror, and everyone has a reaction. And so it was all stuff that the book was why I loved writing it, because it was about obsessions that sometimes felt shameful or embarrassing and yet overwhelming. So it's, and it's funny, when I've tried to write autobiographical stuff, it's dull. I always think my life is not that interesting. And inspiration is so unpredictable, because I wrote a play once because I'd moved into an apartment right off Washington Square that was very Gothic and that had all these sort of theatrical details to it. And it turned out that the actor John Barrymore had lived there at the turn of the last century and had played Hamlet while he was staying there. And the apartment kind of demanded to be written about. And I turned it into a play that was called I Hate Hamlet. And it was, but I thought, my God, the inspiration came from real estate, from a listing in the Times that said medieval duplex, which didn't actually sound all that tempting, if you think in terms of the plumbing.
Torture device.
Yeah, but it was sort of amazing where I thought if I hadn't lived there, I would never have written that. So it comes from all over. You know, whenever you wish you could force inspiration, that's when it stops.
So for all of you,
You hunt it with a pitchfork.
That's true. Gun.
well, this goes into
don't
my
like
next
guns.
question, Maggie.
What?
I'm going to make you answer first. No, I'm curious of how much of the story you know when you start? I mean, when you look at the finished books now, I mean, sort of how much when you sort of had the idea and started to write, did you know, and how much of it came up completely on the fly? Let's start with you, Maggie.
Oh, thank you, David. Not that you're my editor and don't already know,
I know the
how much
answers
of a
to
lie.
all of these questions already.
All right,
but
so when I started the Dream Thieves, this whole series is a projected 4-book series. So theoretically, I had 2 3-page descriptions of each book, which tells me the rough places the plots are going to go, and I thought, I am totally shit hot. I am doing well with this series, because I wrote myself into all kinds of corners with the Shiver trilogy because I had too rough of an outline, and I thought, this is 3 times as long. What can go wrong? Turns out there's a big difference between 3 pages and 400 pages. And so I know the rough places that my plots are going at the beginning, and I know why I'm writing. That's the most important thing, if it's writing for a mood or writing for a character arc, and so I can cling to that when everything else goes horribly wrong. And then I'll have little flashes of scenes and bits of details which are completely non-negotiable. So with the Dream Thieves, I knew that there was going to be a nemesis for Ronan, who was going to be as bad as he was, but had already taken all of his bad ideas and done them and made them bigger. And so I invented this character, Kavinsky, and I knew from the very beginning that he was also going to be a street racer, and he was going to drive a white Mitsubishi with a knife painted on the side. So I knew all this at the beginning. So before I even started really writing it, I went to a Mitsubishi dealership to research, and I sat in one, and I accidentally bought one. I'm a victim of circumstance.
that's how Eliot ended up with 12 pet bonobos, right?
That's right. Breaking many, many laws.
Exactly. Paul, how about you for Gorgeous? Did you know the whole?
I didn't. I mean, I knew where it was headed. I had enough of an outline so that I didn't feel, trapped like, oh, it's going to die after 2 chapters. But then a lot of what I'd planned on went other places entirely, which I think you have to let the book go where it wants to go. And then there were things I loved that had to be cut. I think you have to be very careful about treating every word as golden. But yeah, I mean, I liked having enough of a goal, but then it was also once the characters start to get a strong enough voice, they start to dictate the action, and that is somehow very freeing. So yeah, I mean, enough so that I felt it was rich enough material for an entire book, but not enough so that I felt it had become homework.
Endangered is probably the first book that I wrote where I really had a great sense before I started it where it was going to go. And partially it was because I had to do a lot of research. So I planned this trip to Congo to go spend time at a sanctuary for bonobos in June.
Because you didn't already know anything about bonobos.
That wasn't
correct?
the question.
Right. Well, actually, I bought a pair of bonobos pants, which I'm actually wearing today. Not the exact pair, but that was by accident. I didn't know what it meant. And so then I started looking up bonobos, and I got really into them. And so,
Don't wear pants, it's dangerous.
yeah, or just buy Levi's. It's safer for your travel life. So I knew I was going to go to Congo in June to spend time at the sanctuary, and that gave me 6 months in between, where I didn't really want to get deep into the book because I knew a lot was going to change once I was there. So at that point, I was reading books about Congo and books about bonobos. And so as I was reading, if anything came out that was either an emotional moment that I sort of wanted to keep in mind as I was plotting Endangered, or that was a detail about life during war in Congo, or about how bonobos act, minus all the sexy parts, because it's a YA novel, I had to be a little more careful. I would put it in a document. And so then by the time June rolled around, I had this 70-page notes document that I could then sort of work into an outline form. So I had my story slowly mapping out, and then I had a parallel source of quotes that I sort of spaced out, so that if I was stuck on the book, I could actually turn to this source material and find inspiration in images or things that actually happened. And so it was 6 months before I put down a word. But at that point, it was increasing my attention as a writer. I wasn't just, oh, here's an idea, I just want to get going. I was hungry for it, hungry to start the book. So it actually gave me a lot of momentum going into it. It was a change in my process that I'm going to keep trying to do.
How long did it take you to write that book?
Well, when I arrived, I had already written probably about 100 pages, the first 100 pages. And then the book.
How long is a page?
This is Times New Roman, so 300
So
word
320 words per page,
yeah,
right?
And then it expanded to 300 by the time I was done. So it was about 3 months for drafting, and then maybe 9 months for editing. usually the ratio I have. It's like 3 times as much.
Because your editor's pretty slow.
Yeah, sluggish man.
Totally sluggish man.
It's hard to find good help.
Yeah, I know it is. All right, but it's interesting because you totally set up the final question I will ask before the readings. And I ask you all to think of this really seriously. So famously, of course, Eliot did come upon the topic for Endangered through a pop-up Bonobos pants ad on Facebook. So I want to know what kind of pop-up Facebook ad would inspire you to write a novel? Really, if you had to write a novel based on an advertisement or a brand of clothing, what would it be?
I can't write that book because you told me that my next book can't have so many loving descriptions of cars breaking down.
It could. I mean, if that was really the point of the novel.
Could it be the point of all of them?
But what would the advertisement be? It's a car advertisement?
Anything with wheels.
Really?
Really, yeah.
There
Things That Go is going to be the name of my autobiography.
I see. There isn't a certain brand of automobile you've always wanted to write about?
No.
Really?
No, all. Except for Nissan Altimas. I don't see I could ever be inspired.
All right. Eliot, do you have...
Well, lightning struck once with the pants, so I'm...
But come on, you must...
That's tweetable. I don't know if
Yes.
any of you are using... Oh, wait, you're supposed to turn off your
But
phones.
if it
I'm
led-
good
Struck
now.
once with the pants.
Yes.
There's a dot in the middle
Right.
of that.
It led you to a National Book Award finalist citation, so clearly you have to keep going back to that well.
I'm trying to think of another pants brand that might do it for me.
I'm waiting for it to load.
Levi's. The Levi Strausses went down on the Titanic, so it could be a book about the last Levi. So I could go to jeans.
Interesting.
The Gap could be like a dystopia novel.
You fell
Don't
into the
fall
gap.
into the
yeah.
gap.
That's not where I thought you were going with that, but that's
I already
fine.
wrote Banana Republic basically by going to Congo.
It could be like preschool
Latin
dystopian. You
American.
could call it Baby Gap.
It's the prequel.
It's a prequel, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Paul.
God, because I felt, because when I created this designer, part of the pleasure was I got to create all those pop-ups that you create a brand and a fragrance and a bridge line and everything else, so that it was fun to do that, to say, okay, who would you buy as a Tom Ford figure, as a Marc Jacobs figure, somebody like that. And it did make me desperately want to have my own signature fragrance. Like the Olsen twins.
Exactly.
That's another dot, dot, dot.
What would you call your signature fragrance?
Things That Go.
Oh God, there you go. No,
Oh,
well,
God.
I know. Well, I've learned the hard way, because I once wrote my first novel was called Social Disease, and
That would make an awful title for a fragrance.
well, especially when it was published in England, I went over and there were ads in the subways that said "Social Disease, catch it."
With Paul Rudnick.
With Rudnick. And so, and then when they had to translate the title into other languages, the book was called like gonorrhea. So there's my fragrance.
There you go. Excellent, excellent. All right, so let us switch now to the reading portion. Eliot, would you like to start?
Yeah. So we're going to start, heavy and serious, and then slowly get more lighthearted as we go, which puts me in round 1 with the heavy stuff. So Endangered, as I mentioned, is about a girl who's 14. She's half Congolese, half American. She spends her summers with her mother in Congo and her school years in the States. And so one summer she's with her mother at her sanctuary for orphan bonobos when she comes across a bonobo at the side of the road and adopts him. But Sophie doesn't realize that this puts into play a sort of train of events that by buying a bonobo, she's encouraging the trade, and it escalates. And so while she's sort of trying to orphan this, to take care of this ape, to get him to adulthood, the country falls into war. And so she has to cross the country to get to her mother, who's on the other side of Congo. So I'm going to read actually a portion I haven't read from before. It's my monkey bookmark. There are no, sheriff monkeys in Endangered.
Spoiler alert.
The sequel, I don't know. And so this portion is actually late in the book. Sophie has been separated from Otto in the jungle, and she's woken up, and Otto is missing for the first time since she had him because bonobo orphans attach to human mothers in the sanctuary, and she's basically a surrogate mother for him. So this is the first time in months that she's been without him. Everywhere I looked, I could see small creatures moving. I called out Otto's name again. This time I thought I heard a bonobo call over the breeze rustling through the trees. I sped toward the sound, tripping over ruts and roots, but always scrambling ahead, sometimes on all fours, pushing against the ground with my knuckles. The calls got easier to hear, and I recognized the high-pitched, pulsating sound. Otto in distress. The trail narrowed to pass through a thicket, and as I folded myself through, I saw Otto at the far side of the clearing, dangling between two trees. A length of rope was wrapped tightly around his ankle, a snare. He swayed in the air, a good 8 feet above the ground, revolving slowly, the green vine rope creaking. Otto saw me and shrieked. He jerked in the air, then reached up and tried to grasp the knot in the snare. He failed, his arms again pointing to the distant ground. I didn't know how long he'd been up there, but his foot was swollen and purplish, and the white of his eyes was replaced by red, like the vessels had broken. "Oh, my Otto," I said, "I'll get you down." But how? Even raising my hand as high as I could, I wouldn't be able to reach him. So I took to the trees like a bonobo. I dug my fingertips into the little variations in the bark and pulled myself up high before I knew how. I plucked at the snare's tight rope, and it twanged like a guitar string. I'd hoped to haul Otto up, but the material was too slick to get a grip. I craned into the open air, had my teeth around the plant fiber, and was about to start gnawing when voices made me freeze. Low, terse voices. I would have ignored anything and anyone to get Otto free, but if I were captured, there would be nothing I could do to help him. I pulled back into the cover of the tree's lime green leaves. A man and a woman crept into the clearing. Their movements were purposeful, and I realized either Otto's cries or my own had drawn them here. The man exclaimed when he saw Otto dangling, and they both took positions under him. Otto stared down apprehensively, quietly murping. If they bothered to look closely, they'd see me farther above. They were peering straight at me, though their vision was focused a yard closer. They each had a string of bullets worn across their chests. She reached her rifle tip up and prodded Otto's forehead, causing him to shriek and stare imploringly in my direction. They laughed. She was gorgeous, with glossy short hair and crazy long legs, but with a massive scar across her face. The man had a head that had been scoured by acne long before war scars had been layered on top. He drew a short knife and jabbed it at Otto's hand. Otto brought his pricked palm to his mouth, whimpering in pain and fatigue and confusion. He tried to curl his body up and away, but he was too weak after the hours spent struggling against the snare. I resisted the urge to hurtle out of the foliage to Otto's defense, tried to calm my mind enough to reason through what to do. These weren't typical hunters. The strings of bullets told me they were combatants, probably hungry and unpaid and setting traps for extra food. They'd likely set the snare for smaller game like macaque monkeys or antelope, but they'd be happy to eat a bonobo. The combatants discussed for a minute, and then the woman took to the tree on the other side of the trail, knife clenched between her teeth. She could as easily have chosen my tree, and then I would have had to risk fighting her one-on-one. Once she came up to my level, she crept forward, intent on the snare's knot. She was only a few feet away, and I could see sweat dotting the base of her neck, could smell stale clothing and body odor. I could lunge at her. I could sink my teeth in her neck and throw her off the tree. It's what I most wanted, but what would that do? She'd fall to the ground, and she and her companion would have their guns out, and Otto and I both would be dead. So I watched. I watched her shimmy down, watched her raise the knife. My muscles tensed. If the blade got within a foot of Otto, I would be on her. She cut the rope. Otto fell onto the man's chest and immediately reached his arms out to be held. Instead, the man shrieked in surprise and dropped Otto heavily into the dirt, holding the cut rope at arm's length like he was handling a snapping turtle. As Otto's swollen foot was dragged upward, he was forced to stand on one hand. He cried and flailed his free hand while the woman descended the tree, laughing at her startled partner. The man handed her the rope, and they left the way they'd come, the woman hauling Otto behind. As he skittered along the soil, he scrambled to stay on his back, pressing his coarse palms into the ground to avoid turning over and having his face dragged through the dirt and rocks. He cried hoarsely as the trio disappeared around the bend. I slid down the tree, landing in a rough heap on the ground. Springing to my feet, I willed my breath to keep coming against the sharp constriction in my throat. I guess they saw no need to be quiet, and I was easily able to follow them as they made their way into the city, auto bumping and shrieking behind. I'm here, mon petit. You don't know it, but I'm here. Thank you.
All right. And next, so I'm going to read from my new book, Two Boys Kissing, with this amazing cover by Evan Walsh, who I think is somewhere in here. It is many things. What you need to know for the passage I'm going to read is it is based on a true story of two boys, Maddie and Bobby, who broke the Guinness Book of World Records for the world's longest continuous kiss. They kissed for over 33 hours as a way of protesting inequality in my home state of New Jersey. I found out about it because Maddie Facebooked me after it was done and said that he had been thinking about my book, Boy Meets Boy, when he had been doing it. And it's one of these great circular inspirations insofar as my book, he thought of while he was doing this, and then he told me about it, and I immediately wanted to write a book to honor what he had done. Another component of it is that the book is narrated by a Greek chorus from what I call the gay generation before mine that grappled so much with AIDS at its height. And they are looking down at the gay generation after mine, which I think is defined primarily by the access and what the internet brings, and are sort of commenting as they go along. So I should be reading this as a Greek chorus, but I'm not a Greek chorus, I'm just one author. But you can just hopefully imagine many different voices telling the story. So we join Harry and Craig, the two boys kissing, a few hours into the kiss. And you need to know Harry's parents are very supportive of him and are there. Craig's parents are not. The song Dream a Little Dream of Me comes on Tariq's playlist, which makes Harry think of the movie Beautiful Thing, as Tariq no doubt knew it would. Harry can feel Craig's smile under his lips and knows he must be sharing the same thought. As confirmation, Harry feels Craig's finger on his back, tracing the letter B, then T. They start to shuffle and slow dance. It feels good to move their legs. Smita steps back with the umbrella, and Tariq steps in and starts to dance with her. Harry's parents step in as well. Other people look like they want to join in, but Rachel, watching the cameras, tells them they need to keep clear, not get in the way. The police officer who's been assigned to watch over things offers to get some caution tape. Rachel says that might be a good idea, but asks if there's any way it can avoid saying caution. The officer says she'll see what she can do. It feels so good to Harry to be dancing. It makes him so happy to see his parents smiling as they sway. He wants to sing along, but knows he can't. He holds Craig lightly, and they glide in a slow circle. Craig's eyes are closed, Harry's are opened, which is how Harry sees her first. Craig feels Harry stop. He feels Harry clasp him tighter. He traces a question mark on Harry's back, but there's no way for Harry to respond. He only kisses Craig closer, puts his hand on the back of Craig's neck, warning him to stay focused, warning him not to turn. Then Craig hears it. His name, his mother's voice, his name. We all turn to her. She is a small woman who until 10 minutes ago thought Craig was on a camping trip for the weekend. She looks more confused than angry, and we wish there were a way that we could explain it to her. We want to pull her aside and tell her everything we know, everything our mothers did wrong, everything our mothers did right. Your son is alive, we want to tell her. Your son is living. She doesn't understand why he isn't answering. She doesn't understand why he goes on kissing this other boy, even though she is standing right behind him, saying his name. Mrs. Meachin called me and started to talk to me, and I had no idea what she was talking about. Craig wants to turn around. He wants to try to explain, but he feels Harry's hand on the back of his neck. He remembers why he's here. They are already too far along. He can't reset it. Craig, his mother's voice is cracking. It's Smita who steps forward. She lets go of the umbrella and walks over to Craig's mother. He can't say anything, she says. They have to keep kissing. Craig's mother knows Smita. She's known Smita for a long time. Smita is the only thing that makes sense to her now. It's only vaguely that she understands the crowd, understands the cameras. What's happening? She asks. This was not the way she was supposed to find out. Craig feels the tears starting in his eyes. He tries to stop them, but it's too much. They leak down his cheeks. Harry holds on. Craig shudders, and Harry presses his mouth closer. This was not how it was supposed to be. He'd imagined telling them after. Somehow he believed it would be kept a secret until it was over. He'd have this big accomplishment, and then he could tell them. He imagined gathering them in the den, sitting his parents and his brothers down on the couch while he stood in front of them and told them, like when he was little and he'd put on one-man shows for them right before bed. And whatever happened, they wouldn't be able to take anything away from him. They wouldn't be able to erase anything he'd done. But he wasn't thinking about them, about what it would be like to be in that audience. He realizes it with such shock. He wasn't thinking about them at all. Few of us did. It was our revelation, our event. How could we know that they had a right to feel things too? They had no right to deny us, but they had every right to feel things. He gets this all from the sound of her voice, the way she said his name. Harry's parents have never met Craig's parents. Harry's mother comes over to Craig's mother now and introduces herself. She and Smita try to tell her what's happening. They tell her about the world record, tell her what Craig and Harry are trying to achieve. But I don't understand, Craig's mother says, crying now too. I don't understand. Craig can't bear it. He opens his eyes, looks over to Tariq, who has tears in his own eyes. He mimes writing. Tariq scrambles for a marker and some paper. He runs it over to Craig. All the things Craig has to say boil down to the essential. It's the thing that neither Smita nor Mrs. Ramirez can say. It's within everything they're saying, but they can't unfold it for Craig's mother, can't spell it out to its foundation. Craig writes, "I'm gay, Mom. I'm gay." Craig rotates his and Harry's body so he's facing his mother. Then he holds up his shaky sign. He sees her eyes as she understands it. Then quickly he writes another sign. "I can't stop now. I'm sorry." He is not sorry for being gay, but he is endlessly sorry that this is how she's found out. Or maybe not found out. She doesn't seem entirely surprised by the revelation, only in the way it's being revealed, only in the way it's being confirmed. She's asking Smita if this is Craig's boyfriend, and Smita, poor friend, doesn't know what the better answer is. So she goes with the truth and says, no, that's not what this is about. Harry and Craig are friends. They are kissing to show the world that it's okay for two boys to kiss. Mr. Ramirez brings over a chair so Craig's mother can sit down. "It's a lot to process," he says. At this point, some of our mothers would have laughed, would have said, understatement of the year. Others would have said, "Fuck you," and stormed away. Still others did exactly what Craig's mother does now, falling silent, falling completely into the sound of her own thoughts, which can't be heard from the outside. Mrs. Ramirez tries to hold her hand, give her support. Craig's mother pulls her hand away. Craig is twisting in place, a bystander to one of the most important moments of his life. Harry understands this and loosens his grip. If you need to go, it's okay. But what can Craig say? And if he lets go now, all of this will have been for nothing. He lets the paper and marker fall to the grass. He wraps his arms around Harry and pulls him in for a real kiss, a true kiss. His tears run down his cheeks into their mouths. Don't let go. The crowd cheers. Craig and Harry had forgotten they were there. Tariq can't stand it. He feels it's in some way his fault too. He plants himself right there in front of Craig's mother and says, "You need to love him. I don't care who you thought he was or who you want him to be. You need to love him exactly as he is because your son is a remarkable human being. You have to understand that." And Craig's mother whispers back, I know. This time it's Smita who takes her hand, and she doesn't pull away. "It's okay," Smita says. "He's fine. Everything's fine." Harry can feel Craig going slack and catches him. All that tension suddenly released in sobs. Harry keeps his mouth on top of Craig's. They do not break the kiss. And now for something a little lighter.
Okay. All right. Well, I told you the kind of basic setup of the book. So this takes place about halfway in when Becky, our heroine, has been transformed into this supernaturally beautiful creature named Rebecca, and her life has just taken her all sorts of places, including to England, where she was shooting a movie, and she's been introduced to Gregory, who's the Crown Prince of England, and a romance has begun. And because Becky is trying to figure out how all of that works, she invites her best friend from the trailer park, whose name is Rocher. She was named after her mother's favorite chocolate, which, as she likes to point out, is a premium chocolate. And so she sends Rocher a plane ticket, and Rocher flies over to be her advisor on all things royal. And this is what happens sort of right after Rocher arrives. And Rocher kind of has a mouth on her. By the time, and they're in the hotel room where Rebecca is in all of her wonderful designer finery. By the time Rocher returned, Prince Gregory's secretary had called and invited me to accompany His Royal Highness to the British Museum the next night for the opening of an exhibit entitled The Female Ideal. Okay, this is a really good sign, Rocher said, but there's something I have to say if we want this whole thing to work. I know that Prince Gregory is so cute and smart and nice, he's the total package, but you cannot, under any circumstances, no matter what he says, even if he promises you like a castle or a golden fleece or Ireland, you cannot fuck him. What? Just listen to me, because it's a rule. It's like the biggest princess rule of all. It's like, what if Cinderella is at the ball, right? And she's waltzing with Prince Charming, but she's keeping one eye on the clock because it's 11:15, and she knows that if she's still there at midnight, boom, everything vanishes, the carriage turns back into a pumpkin, the footmen are all mice, and the prince finds out that she's just some skank from the suburbs. But because the prince is so hot, she continued, and because Cinderella, she's been cooped up with her stepsisters for so long, and her dress is so amazing. So what if she drags the prince into the royal cloakroom and gives him a blowjob? You know, just as a way of saying, I really like you, and it's such a great night, and I just want to prove that you're special. I am not gonna do that. I know, because it would ruin everything. Because the next day, no decent prince is gonna knock on every door in town going, I'm looking for the beautiful young lady who fits this glass slipper and who also gives the most righteous head in the kingdom. So you mean if I want to marry the prince, I should do what? Play hard to get? No. And I have no right to say this, but I have to ask you something. Of course, anything. What? Could I, just for a second, and I just washed my hands, and I promise that I'll be extra super unbelievably careful, but could I try on your coat? Just for a second, please. As I slipped off the red silk coat and gestured for Rocher to turn around so I could help her into it, I tried to remember how old I'd been when I'd first noticed not just what people looked like, but which people looked better. I'd always thought that Rocher looked wonderful, but she'd hated her bushels of thick, kinky red hair and her generous buckets of freckles and her long, wiry arms. Rocher thought she was a prancing sock monkey or an overgrown shrub, but when we were little, I'd never rated her looks because she was Rocher, who I talked to 1,000,000 times every day and who sometimes got overexcited about, say, a new elastic bracelet comprised of miniature baby doll heads, or who'd gotten royally pissed off when a boy she'd had a crush on had called her a creepy caterpillar. We were facing the full-length mirror, which had been set up in the middle of the room, and with her eyes still closed, Rocher asked, "So, tell me the truth. How do I look?" No, that's wrong. What do I look like? Do I look like me, or you, or me plus Tom Kelly? Am I the most beautiful red-haired woman who's ever lived? Has anything, happened? Who am I? Rocher opened her eyes. She looked exactly the same. No, she looked like Rocher playing rainy day dress-up in her mother's or her older sister's fancy wardrobe. The coat didn't suit her, and it hadn't changed her, and I felt guilty and disgusting because a part of me was relieved. "You look great," I said. Rocher eyed me in silence. She knew everything I'd been thinking, and she understood. Rocher would let me be Rebecca. She could deal with that, but only me. I started to say something, to offer some syrupy, useless reassurance, but Rocher held up a hand and said, "It's okay."
So I'm going to read, but I'm going to require volunteers, and before I do, I have to see if this other microphone will work. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are you still on microphone? How can we tell? Is that one also doing things? Yes? Good.
Yeah.
Okay. What I need is I'm going to read a chapter from the Dream Thieves, and it's got a couple of different voices in it, and it will be so much more interesting if some of you guys play the extra voices. So I need 3 volunteers, and the only requirement is that you can project and you're literate. Anyone? You up front, you over on the edge, and you over here. Gentlemen, come on down. Can you climb, hitch? Give me your hand.
This makes it a little more challenging.
There we go. There's a chair.
Maggie, this is why we can't have nice things.
I know, it's better this way. All right. Say something. Oh, wait, I know what you sound like. Say something.
Hi.
Say something.
Hey.
Ha ha. All right. You're going to be Calla. You're going to be Mr. Gray. You're going to be Persephone. I'm going to be me. Oh, wait. We're going to stand in front of these gentlemen here, blocking the audience's view of them. Yes? All right. So I need you all to huddle next to that. Sorry, I'm totaling. We're used to having millions of microphones. Just sit there and look pretty. Okay. You'll notice that, like a clever author, I have actually highlighted your parts in yellow. Why, thanks. And you guys feel up to this task? You'll have to fight for this one microphone. Yes? Are you nervous? A little bit? They love you. They already love you. Yeah? Yeah. Okay, so the only thing I think that you need to know before we start reading this is that this comes from the Dream Thieves, the second book, and it takes place at 300 Fox Way, which is where all of the psychics ply their trade. I think the only other thing you need to know is that this introduces the Gray Man, who's a new character in the Dream Thieves. He is an amiable hitman who comes to town looking for an object that he thinks will allow the person to take things out of their dreams. He doesn't know yet that it's a person and not an object, but I don't think we address that in this chapter. Are you guys ready? Mr. Gray, Persephone, Calla? Good. Go, Maggie. Chapter 14. 300 Foxway, Henrietta, Virginia was the place to go for the spiritual, the unseen, the mysterious, and the yet to occur. For a not unreasonable fee, any of the women under its roof would read your palm, pull your cards, cleanse your energy, connect you with deceased relatives, or listen to the dreadful week you had just lived through. But on days off, it became a game. Mora, Calla, and Persephone scavenged the house for magazines, books, cereal boxes, old deck of tarot cards, anything with words or images. One woman selected an image and hid it from the others, and the other two experimented with how accurate they could get their guesses. They made predictions with their backs to one another, with the cards splayed, with different numbers of candles on the table, while standing in buckets of water, calling up and down 3 or 7 stairs from the front hallway. Mora called it continuing education. Calla called it turning tricks. Persephone called it that thing we could do if there's nothing on television. That day, after the teens had left the house, that's page turn. After the teens had left the house, the women abandoned work and set up the game in the shabby but comfortable living room.
I'm very nearly drunk enough to be transcendent,
Calla said after a space. She was not the only psychic drinking, but she was the closest one to transcendence. Persephone peered dubiously into the bottom of her own glass. In a very small voice, her voice was always small, she said sadly,
I'm not drunk at all.
Mora offered, It's the Estonian in you. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Mora swore delicately, one well-chosen and highly specific word. Calla swore indelicately, several more words with rather fewer syllables. Then Mora went for the front door and reappeared with a tall man. He was very gray. He wore a dark gray V-neck t-shirt that emphasized the muscular slope to his shoulders. His slacks were a deeper gray. His hair was an ashy blonde, drained of color, and so was the fashionable week-old facial hair around his mouth. Even his irises were gray. It escaped none of the women in the room that he was handsome. This is Mr.
Gray.
We're closed.
Calla is rude. We're not closed. We're busy?
This was said with a question in her voice and an anxious glance toward Mora. That's what I told him. However, it turns out that Mr.
Gray.
Gray doesn't really need a reading. He's a novelist researching psychics. He just wants to observe. Calla rattled the ice in her glass. One of her eyebrows looked exceptionally skeptical.
What do you write, Mr. Gray?
He smiled easily at her. They noticed he had extraordinarily straight teeth.
Thrillers. Do you read much?
She merely hissed. Do you mind if he stays? He knows poetry.
Give me a stanza and I'll fetch you a drink.
Without the slightest hesitation or suggestion of self-consciousness, the gray man placed his hands in the pockets of his dark gray slacks and said,
Where has gone the steed? Where has gone the youth? Where has gone the giver of treasure? Where are the feasting seats? Where the revelry in the hall? Alas, bright goblet, alas, mailed warrior, alas, prince's glory, how the time has passed away obscured beneath the crown of night, as it never were.
Do it in the original Old English and I'll put alcohol in that drink.
He did. Calla went to get him a drink. After she had returned and the gray man had been encouraged to sit on the worn couch, Mora said, I'll warn you that if you try anything, Calla has mace. By way of demonstration, Calla removed a small black container of pepper spray from her small red purse. And Persephone is Russian.
Estonian.
And I know how to punch a man's nose into his brain.
What a coincidence. So do I.
He watched with an attentiveness both polite and flattering as Mora scraped her cards up from the sofa cushions. He leaned to pick up one she had missed.
This fellow looks unhappy.
The art depicted a man stuck with 10 swords. The victim lay on his face, as most people did, after being stuck with 10 swords. That's a fellow after Calla's done with him, Mora said. Good news for him is that the 10s represent the end of a cycle. This card represents the absolute worst it'll get.
Does seem like there's not much worse than 10 points in your back and dust in your mouth.
Look, his face looks a little like yours. The gray man studied the card. He placed his finger on the blade rammed through the victim's back.
And that sword looked a little like you.
He glanced at Mora. It was a glance. She glanced back. It was also a glance.
Well.
Would you do the honor, Mr. Gray? Mora handed him the deck of cards. You'll have to ask top or bottom. Mr. Gray gravely accepted the responsibility. He asked Calla.
Top or bottom?
3 of cups, and top, of course, the only place to be.
Mr. Gray removed the card from the top and turned it over. Of course it was the 3 of cups. Mora grinned. Empress, bottom. The Gray man removed the card from the bottom and showed it to the room. The Empress's gown was suggested with a liberal swipe of charcoal, and her crown was studded with inky fruits or jewels. The Gray man clapped slowly.
4 of wands, bottom.
10 of coins, top.
Ace of cups, bottom.
The sun, bottom.
4 of swords, top.
The Gray man flipped the cards again and again, revealing the correct predictions. Persephone's quiet voice cut through Mora and Calla's increasingly loud competition.
The King of Swords.
Everyone turned to look at Persephone, who sat with her knees together and her hands folded neatly in her lap. Occasionally, Persephone appeared both 8 years old and 80 at once. Now was one of those times. The Gray man's hand hovered obediently over the deck.
Top or bottom?
16 cards from the top, I believe.
Mora and Calla both raised an eyebrow. Calla's went up further. The Gray man carefully counted the cards, double-checked his count, and then turned over the 16th card for the others to see. The King of Swords, master of his own emotions, master of his own intellect, master of reason, gazed out at them, expression inscrutable.
That's Mr. Gray's card.
Are you sure? At a wordless agreement from Persephone, Mora turned to the Gray man. Do you think that's your card? The Gray man turned the card one way and another, as if it would reveal its secrets to him.
I don't know much about tarot. Is it a terrible card?
No card is a terrible card. The interpretation can be very different at each reading, but the King of Swords is a powerful card. He's strong but impartial. He's very, very good about making decisions based upon facts instead of emotion. No, it's not a terrible card, but I'm picking up something else off it. Something like...
Violence.
It was a word that had an immediate effect on everyone in the room. Yes, violence. Is that what you meant, Persephone? Yes. All 3 of them had leaned unconsciously toward one another. Sometimes Mora, Persephone, and Calla seemed more like 3 parts of the same entity instead of 3 separate women. The 3 of them turned as one to Mr. Gray.
My work is sometimes violent.
I thought you said you were researching a novel.
That was a lie. I'm sorry. I had to think quickly when you said I couldn't have a reading.
So what's the truth?
I'm a hitman.
This confession ushered in several moments of silence. The Gray man's answer seemed very flippant, but his voice suggested otherwise. It was the sort of answer that required an immediate clarification or qualification, but he offered nothing. That's not very funny.
No, it's not.
And does work bring you here tonight?
Just research.
For work?
Everything is research for work in its way.
He did absolutely nothing to make his words easier to accept. It was impossible to tell if he was asking them to believe him, or to humor him, or to fear him. He merely laid out his confession and waited. Finally, Mora said, "Might be nice to have someone deadlier than Calla in the room for a change." She glanced at him. He glanced back. There was a wordless, tacit agreement in it. They all had another drink. The Gray man asked knowledgeable questions full of wry humor. Sometime later, he stood, took everyone's empty glasses to the kitchen, and excused himself with a glance at his watch.
Not that I wouldn't like to stay.
Then he asked if he could return later in the week. And Mora said yes. After he had gone, Calla looked through his wallet, which she had stolen as he left.
The idea is faith. But on Mrs. Credit Cards, why ever did you say yes?
Something like that. Makes me feel better if I can keep my eye on it.
Oh, I think we all know what you're keeping your eye on.
Thanks, guys. Excellent, Persephone. Now you get to jump down and I'll retrieve my chair.
Why don't you go
Oh,
around?
they want
Yes.
you to go out the way that's better for insurance. Apparently not. Oh, well.
Look, a chair.
This is a magical place.
I
Truly,
know.
New York City is a
Come on back.
place
Somehow
of
they
dreams.
read your mind. All right, we have time for about 10 minutes worth of questions. So if you have a question, just raise your hand.
I have lots of
If we
questions.
could, yes, I'm sure you do. If you don't have questions, we will of course go to Maggie's. Are there any questions? Yes.
This is a question for Maggie. I was wondering sort of where do you start with, because a lot of your books are based in legends, lore and such stuff, and sort of where do you start with that?
Like at the very beginning? I was a small child. I didn't really eat anything except for round foods. Cheerios, Oreos. You don't mean at the very beginning. For me, like I said earlier, the genesis always comes with an atmosphere or a mood more than a plot. So for me, it's the kind of book that I want to live with for the next year of my life. And then as long as I have that in my head, no matter how far off the beaten path I wander, I can always come back to that one moment. How about you, Eliot?
I was not ready, I was just listening.
Did you want me to expound further at the beginning?
Yeah, well, mine started with the pair of pants that I bought online. So,
The mythology of the bonobo panda.
yeah, seriously, I'm doing a lot for their brand, actually. Keep talking about them. What about you guys?
I don't know. I mean, I had this idea about 3 dresses, and I don't know where it came from, and it stuck around for actually a few years, and I wasn't sure if it was a play or a movie or what it was. And I just kept coming back, it just kept gnawing at me, so that it's that kind of, I always find that helps when something won't leave you alone. It tends to mean, this is worthy. But yeah, I have no idea where it first originated.
That's the thing that's hard, isn't it? Everyone's always asking me, where do you first get your idea? Where did it first start? And the thing is, trying to trace it backwards. People only ask you this question after they've read the book. So not only has it been 12 months since you turned in your manuscript, but also it's been, 4 months since you started the editing or whatever. And so you go backwards. And so by the time someone's asking you this question, that was like 2008. God knows what was happening then.
Unless it comes from a
People
Facebook
were listening to
ad.
the Killers.
That's right. That's very cool.
Wow, I remember that time. God.
It's a dark time.
And they were good, yeah.
But don't worry, Brandon Flowers still loves Brandon. Wait, is Brandon
Yeah.
Flowers here? No.
We are being live
He's looking at
I'm
us.
sure he's watching
He's
the
looking
live
at
stream.
himself in the mirror.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
I read books on audio while I'm driving, and it's kind of a twofold question. How important do you think the reader of the book is, or a choice of readers, and how much do the authors have in saying who reads the novels?
For audiobooks, I mean, I'll go first because I did the audiobook for Two Boys Kissing, and I had to audition for it because more for my own sanity than anything else. But I knew they were not going to get a chorus of dead gay men to record it, so I figured that I would rather do it myself. And it was a strange process. I mean, because I am not an actor, I've not been trained as an actor, I have no desire to be an actor. So being in a soundproof booth, listening to my own voice for 4-hour stretches at a time was not a happy thing. And I had the consolation of knowing not only could I be making a bad performance, but I could be butchering my own book, which was really, wow, that's
But
great.
did your
And so-
district send you gifts for home?
I mean, every now and then a parachute would drop. But I was like, how am I supposed to tap a tree? There are no trees in this soundproof booth. But that was the one time where I had wanted to do it myself, but other times they do usually send the audio clips of the readers for the authors to take a listen to. I have loved, my favorite, I mean, I love really almost all of the audiobooks that have been done for my books. But what has been really interesting for me is for Every Day, my book about somebody who wakes up every day in a different body and different life, they chose a female reader with a very low masculine voice. But it's been interesting in that the people who read the book, by and large, because the first body A is in is male, or because I'm a male writer, there is an assumption that A is male, even though A is neither. Whereas the people who experience the audiobook first, because it is a female voice reading to them, think of A as female and actually hear a different book because of that. So that's been really fascinating to me. How about you guys?
I've never had an audiobook, so I'll opt out of this one.
What was it?
No, go ahead.
Oh no, I did the audiobook. I had an earlier collection of sort of essays and things where I did the audiobook, which gave me such respect for actors because it really is tough. Although I was proud because my recording sessions were right in between the ones by 50 Cent, the rapper, and Gloria Vanderbilt, who had written an autobiographical
Wait, so do you
novel.
listen to 50 Cent?
What I was fascinated by with 50 Cent was that he had an entourage.
Because I generally find people who say the rapper afterwards generally don't listen to his work.
No, I've heard just enough to know to not call him 50 cents.
Right. But and it's different from 50 Cent the florist.
Yeah. The thing that the recording engineers told me about 50, as I called him, was that he had this big entourage with him. They said he was very nice, but that whenever there was a question of how to pronounce a word, the entourage would freeze, and however 50 wanted to say it, that was what it was. So that there was a fear element in the room. But I'm gorgeous that I was so grateful they gave me audition tapes for a variety of actresses. All of them were clearly terrific actresses, but because the book is all told in the first person, and it's an 18-year-old girl, and she's from the South, and all those things that I would never want to attempt, some of them sounded just too sophisticated, too knowing, too set, and I wanted someone who felt genuinely young and who felt like that she didn't know what was going to happen next, which is, I found a lot of people who read an awful lot of audiobooks tend to slow it down, and I understand the need for that sometimes for people listening to be able to keep up with the book. But for this, I wanted it to be a little juicier and a little more lively, and the actress who we chose was just wonderful because you thought, oh, that's the girl. This sounds like she's just talking to you. So it's a casting process, just like in the theaters, when you want someone who can then go on to do all the different voices as well and do character voices. But mostly you wanted the spirit of the book. And so I was just delighted.
I'm very lucky to have quite a large say in my auditions as well, which was very nice, especially for the Scorpio Races audiobook, which I'm not a huge audiobook reader because I don't sit still very long. If I'm in the car, usually I'm that person listening to music that makes you... your mom looks at my car and goes, that's part of the problem, because my car is going, and so there's not usually room for an audiobook in there as well. But the Scorpio Races I really enjoyed all the way through, and I picked these two narrators, and the most hilarious part of the story is actually at the very end. The book got nominated for an Odyssey Award, and it won an honor, and at the final event, we were all together, the narrators and myself and the librarians who had nominated it. And so Steve West, the voice actor who does the voice of Sean Kendrick, not only has a very attractive voice, but he is quite attractive in person as well. And so the librarians had us all in the same room, and they said, oh, it's time for a group photo. Not you, Fiona, the voice who did Puck. Not you, Maggie, just Steve. And then they all had him around, and they were sitting at the table with him, and they would say things like, so Steve, back in England where you're from, do they also find you super attractive? And then they would say things like, oh, Steve, do you ever do library visits? And he would very politely go, what does a library visit entail? I'm like, Steve, don't answer that. It entails you taking your shirt off in that library. Does that answer the question?
I think so.
It answers that question.
Yeah, and many
What
more.
we didn't know we wanted.
Yes, over there.
For anyone, but you talked about the process of revision. Who do you show your work to, or how do you revisit it?
Editor Maggie, do you want to start with this? Just
Our editor is on the panel, so I have probably 3 or 4 really important writer friends that we have lunch, so we exchange manuscripts. I used to be in a writers group, but once you're producing longer work, it gets hard, all together to go through, a longer passage. Although we do meet up once every month. I also have the one-on-ones. In fact, I think one is in the audience somewhere, Marie, a great writer.
Is she actually in the audience?
She was.
She left.
Yeah, I just called her out.
Oh.
There she is. Yay. She has a great
Good
coat.
job you staying.
yeah.
So there's that one-on-one level, but I think I probably spend, as I said, about 3 times as much time in the revision process, and a lot of it comes out of those interactions.
Yeah, I love rewriting. I think it's less daunting than the blank page because you've got something to work with, so that I remember I once wrote a whole novel, and after I was done, I reread it and I threw the whole thing out. And when I tell people that story, they think, oh, how awful. And I thought, no, you have no idea the relief of saying nobody will have to see this. But I have a wonderful editor at Scholastic, too, a woman named Rachel Griffith, and she is so smart and has been so helpful. And she has this wonderful trick she uses, and I love it every time she does it, which is she'll say, Paul, this section of the book, it's wonderful just as it is. It would be great. It would be perfect. We could just include it just the way it is. She says, but I just had one thought. And so I always know what's coming, and I finally said, Rachel, you don't have to do the first part anymore. Just tell me, get rid of that, it's awful. But it's, it's so great to be able to sort of get in there and fix something. And to know that, okay, you've tried a multitude of approaches there, and sometimes it may mean that, okay, that entire chapter shouldn't be there, because if you try it that many times and it keeps feeling wrong, there may be some larger issue. But then sometimes if you realize, oh, okay, here's the key, then that it's such a wonderful feeling. And that also, wait, now my brain just died. It's that sense of, I think it took me a while to learn it, but that revision is the huge majority of the work.
How many of you are actually writers yourself? I actually have 2 critique partners who read everything before my friendly editor, David, reads it. And they're not my first 2 critique partners. I went through many, many writers groups, and I thought that I just hated edits, even though I really liked the idea of getting in, because like Paul, I really love the concept of working with something that's already there. But I kept on getting these suggestions back that when I looked at them and tried to implement them, they made me feel kind of vaguely uncomfortable. Like they didn't make me want to immediately leap in and start working on it again. I always felt like I was trying to work really hard to implement them. And so I then sold my first book to a different editor, and he had an amazing edit letter that came back, and it sounded like what I would have said about this book if I was objective and hadn't read it 8 billion times. And so that's when I knew the problem wasn't with the edits, it was with the editor. And so I did a bunch of dating online, a critique partner dating service, which is still up on my blog now, which is the reason why I asked you guys if you're writers, because this is rather nitty gritty. You can search for it now, Critique Partner Love Connection. There's like 300 people who are looking for other writers to connect with. That's how I found my 2 critique partners. They read the same kind of thing I like to read. They write the same type of thing I like to write. So I know they're never trying to change my book into something I don't want it to be. And like Paul, I throw tons of stuff out. Throwing stuff out is my big solution to writer's block. I think Dream Thieves is 125,000 words long or something like that. I have an outtakes folder where I put everything so I can pretend I'll put it back in. It's more than 150,000 words. Yeah.
I once met a writer, and she was the most confident person I'd ever met, and she was kind of delightful, and she was also the most untalented person I'd ever met. And because she loved her own work so much, and she told me that at the end of each writing day, she would take the pages that she'd written and put them in the freezer. And I said, why? And she said, because if your building burns down, the freezer will tend not to burn, and the pages would be preserved. I thought, and chilled. But the idea of that much reverence for your own stuff seemed, sort of incredibly admirable and nuts. So that you really have to, because I remembered the thing when my brain died, which was that sometimes when I'm stuck on something, I almost always will find the answer elsewhere in the book, sometimes earlier, if I really think about it and you go through and you think, oh, right, there was some detail of that character's early life or something someone else said to them that will lead to the solution. That sometimes it's not going wildly afield, that it's you've answered the question, you just have to find where.
Yeah, your subconscious knows a story that you want to tell.
Yeah. All right, I think we are out of time, insofar as out of time for the Q&A, but we are going to retire to wherever books are being signed, and we will sign as many books as you would like us to sign, as long as we have written them. But it has been a profound pleasure to share the stage with my fellow authors and to be with you this afternoon. So thank you for coming, and thanks to the 92nd Street Y for having us here.